Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Order of Shirán by R.K. Lander, narrated by Gary Bennett. Chapter 1. Order of Dominie. To the northwest of the divine Isle of Estuary lies the Source, elven gateway from the first world of Belleran to the second world of Naz'arán. It is a path only the dead can take. But before they can live again, they must travel through the realm of the Order of Dominie. Resurrection, where the spirit regains its conscious self. Revival, where memories return. Academy, where knowledge of the new world is imparted. It is a necessary journey taken by the guiding hand of the Order of Dominie. Order of Dominie, High Master Dominie Sebhat. Frontier, Estuary, Northeastern Naz'arán, Second World. It is the way of all elves who walk the short road. There are no exceptions. Master Dominie Benzir leaned forward in his seat, inquisitive eyes glued to the master theorist who was pacing before his avid students. Brow furrowed, words flowing skillfully, eyes fixed on a world that was not here. Sebhat, leader of the Order of Dominie, had thoroughly captivated his audience of tutor and mentor dominies. Sebhat had traveled from the Source itself, where the buildings of resurrection lay. He had stopped at Revival, then Academy, and finally here, in Frontier, first and only city in Estuary. This was where the students of the Order of Dominie took their first steps upon a 10-year apprenticeship towards mastery. Indeed, so far, Sebhat had said little that Benzir didn't already know. He was a Master Dominie, had only come to listen to the words of an unrivaled metaphysician and thanatologist, subjects that fascinated Benzir more than any other, even winemaking. But Sebhat was more than the High Master Dominie. His fiery red hair and purple eyes were a testimony to his nature. He was a demi-god. Master Dominie Benzir had been guiding spirits back to life for many decades, had achieved the highest rank that existed within the Order of Dominie, but Sebhat was the true genius. His wisdom, his deep empathy, the passion with which he spoke, and his oftentimes subversive claims, made him one of the few elves Benzir truly admired. It also made him dangerous to know. For how does one hide things from such a perceptive soul? His eyes wandered over the avid crowd of mentor and tutor dominies, their awe-inspired faces, tentative hands rising or slowly dropping in disappointment when someone else was signaled out to question the greatest High Master Estuary had ever seen. Other masters had come too, those who were not currently guiding spirits in Rival or Academy. He knew many of them, even liked a few of them, but none were his friends. What of the Divine Ones, the Baranor and Barator? Benzir looked at the young tutor sitting in the third row back, red tinged to his cheeks, hands fiddling with the buttons at his cuff. He'd surely only been in the Order for a few weeks. The concept of Baranor and Barator, and what happened to them after death, was still fresh, almost magical. Aria, god of Belleran, chooses her divine servants in life, but it is in death that they are given the choice to become liminal. Should they refuse, they will pass through resurrection and revival, then Academy and Frontier, just like anyone else. Upon their enlightenment, they will cross the sundering mists and live their lives in Naz'arán, however they choose. But should they accept liminality, they must evolve. The young tutor's eyes flared, and Benzir knew he wanted to ask about the Shirán. But self-doubt and surrender were easy to spot for one as experienced as Benzir, and when the boy's shoulders slumped and he sat back in his seat, another voice rose over the quiet murmurs. How can we tell what choice a Barator or Baranor took? Benzir sat straighter in his chair, looking from the hopeful tutor to the master theorist, Sebhat's head tilted backwards, eyes closing. Exasperation. Benzir could see it in the set of his features. The young ones always wanted to know about the Order of Shirán. It was fair enough, he supposed, but there were so many other fascinating subjects on which to interrogate the master. However, far be it from Benzir to draw attention to himself. It takes experience and empathy to identify a nascent liminal. It takes patience and a superior sense of observation and logic. But should you suspect they choose the path of divine service, you must report it to a master, or even to myself. We will guide you. Suffice it to say that once enlightenment graces them and their past life emerges, they must travel to Origenta. Benzir observed Sebat closely, saw the calculated way he had answered, enough to satisfy a tutor, insufficient for a master like himself. There would be time enough for the students to learn of the Shirán and their liminal ways. Too much too soon was never a good thing, not here in Estuary, not ever, he reckoned. Master Sebat, why can the reborn not be prompted to remember? Why must the process of enlightenment occur spontaneously? Sebat's heavy gaze landed on the curious woman with the hawk-like nose and slanted eyes. She startled, swayed backwards in her seat, unaccustomed to the burden of wisdom in the master's purple eyes. You should not fear me, tutor. You will guide many Belaics on their roads into Naz'arán, some of whom will be illustrious thinkers, mighty warriors, commanders of kingdoms and empires. Your wisdom, your empathy, must shine, for it is the only thing that will comfort them in their time of need. But as to your question, I wonder if you can answer it for us. Sebat turned from the enthralled tutor and locked gazes with Benzir. The Master Dominie tried and failed to look away, pursed his lips, and rode the waves of indecision and surprise as neutrally as he could. Sebat smiled kindly. Benzir cleared his throat and stood. Their return must flow from the soul. There is a mechanism in the mind that seems to understand what can and cannot be assimilated, when it can be accepted and when it cannot. Immortality itself can only be endured if the burdens of the past can be carried, tolerated, and understood, softened into something that can be controlled. Recalling a past life must be on the spirit's terms, and is sometimes slow, other times swift. But every memory must be digested and internalized, stored away before the next one can be tackled. It is our job to ensure an adequate pace, with sufficient time for emotions to be handled. You see, the death of one's own body is surprisingly hard to come to terms with. The weight of pity is sometimes insurmountable. Indeed, there are first-worlders who never leave revival, or are sent to confinement. Always remember that the death of an elf is never fortuitous. It is always traumatic. It is that trauma we must deal with, the grief it evokes. Teach our spirits to bear the burden of memory, learn from it, enable them to continue. And Benzir glanced at Sebat, found him staring out of the window. And there is evidence to suggest that forcing enlightenment may damage the spirit's ability to remember in the future. What would have flowed naturally with time becomes stilted, fragmented. A respectful silence followed in the wake of Benzir's words, and Sebat stared hard at him. You have read my treatise, and so tell me, Master Dominie, how does the reluctant spirit make you feel? Benzir steeled himself, because Sebat's eyes seemed all-knowing and yet unreadable, even to him. The question was an odd one, but he'd try to answer it all the same. Feel. It makes me sad, although I can never show it. It makes me wonder at the workings of the universe, of why elven resurrection should be this way. It makes me question immortality and continuity, whether it would not be best to die and begin again, as I believe mortals do. Silence fell over the room. The murmurs and the hushed conversations, nothing but whispery echoes in the wake of Benzir's voiced ruminations. And yet mortals would have our continuity, our inborn immortality. They want it. Indeed, they kill for it. Oftentimes we want what we don't have. His words had come out too fast, too curt. He stopped, calmed himself, and continued. The key is perhaps understanding the true implications of continuity, as opposed to extinction and renewal. The question is whether immortality is intrinsically better than mortality. Gasps sounded around the lecture hall, but Sebat held up his hand for silence. And you, Master Benzir, do you understand the implications of continuity? Benzir took his time answering. Beyond the accumulation of wisdom, no, I don't understand. All I know is that I don't want to die, but that is not logical unless I can explain why I don't want to die. Some souls in confinement beg for oblivion, would take their own lives if we allowed it. I sometimes wonder whether we should. He'd said too much, turned away, and sat down abruptly, fiddled with the papers on the desk before him. Sebat nodded slowly. Excellent observations. You have the makings of a theorist. Sebat turned, rich brown boots thudding over the raised wooden platform, black robes swishing around them. Humble attire for a demi-god, thought Benzir. We are immortal, and nay, I would not trade that in exchange for a simpler transition from one life to the next. It is in this very transition that speaks to us of the workings of this universe, the place that envelops the elven worlds. Mine is the onus of studying it, understanding it. Yours is the duty of easing that transition, welcoming and tutoring the Belaics who come to us through death. One day it may be your turn to walk that tortuous path into Ul'aran. And yet you will know there is life on the other end, that there is meaning to our journeys. We must only find out what it is, and thus understand continuity, and why we instinctively want it. A bell tolled from beyond the double doors, and Benzir's head whipped to the entrance, eyes glittering, anger spiking almost out of control. He wanted to slam the door shut, lock it, and melt the key. He wanted to smash the bell into the wall, break it to pieces. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and when next he opened them, the room was bustling with activity. The tutor and Mentor Dominies rose, grabbed their books and papers, and made for the platform where Sebat waited patiently. Benzir listened to their excited chatter, watched their waving hands, flashing eyes, and furrowed brows. Sebat had inflamed their academic minds, and Benzir knew they would be talking about the demigod's visit to Academy for months, if not years, to come. You have a question, Master? Benzir's head shot up, only now realizing he had floated away on a cloud of thoughts, not all of them good. Master Sebat was looking down on him in curiosity, not a tutor, mentor, or master in sight. Benzir stood, fiddled with the tie of his black sash. I have many, High Master, but one would lead to another, and another. You would never be free of me should I ask but one question. Benzir smiled, but Sebat did not. Then I will return one day, seek you out so that you can ask, and then, perhaps, you will allow me to ask you. Benzir frowned, shook his head. What would the High Master Dominie ask of one such as me? There you are. You asked a question. What are we to do? I hear you make excellent wine. Benzir's eyebrows shot to his hairline. Well, I enjoy it, Probably a little too much, he chuckled. Ah, true mirth. That is a good thing. When next I come to Frontier, or perhaps you to Resurrection, you must invite me to a glass or two of your special brew. Benzir's smile widened, his eyes softening. He wanted to clap his hands together, dance a jig, and throw his arms out to the wind. Instead, he shoved his hands into his ample sleeves and bowed. Sabat's soft smile faded, and he turned. Benzir watched him leave, but the closer the demi-god got to the door, the more urgent was his need to call out, "Master!" Sabat turned, mildly surprised. "Where do the elven worlds end, do you think? Is there peace at the end of our roads?" Sabat stared back at Benzir, and in those millennia-old eyes he saw passion and compassion. He saw wisdom, and he knew his knowledge surpassed the frontiers of his own will. Sabat understood what Benzir thought he hid so well, and yet he said nothing. "That is a good question, the same question I ask myself every day. And if it is relevant to the immortals, so too must I ask where the road of a mortal leads, whether there is a place for them after death that does not drive them to destruction. It may prove to be the end of the centuries-old war we wage in the south. Do you think it may also apply to the mortal elves, those who chose to die?" For just a moment, Sabat's face fell, and a terrible grief washed over him. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the practiced facade of the High Master Dominie. "Who can say? I cannot. And this is, perhaps, the most fascinating question of them all. Immortal elves, capable of returning from death. Demigods whose enlightenment is instant, their minds intact and unchanged. And gods who never die. What is the key, Benzir? Will mortals one day be immortal, and this war we wage become irrelevant? Until we understand this, mortals remain the catalyst for war on Naz'arán, a war the revenant demi-god seeks to perpetuate." "You do not name him," murmured Benzir. "And I never will." Benzir shook his head. "It boggles the mind, and yet, if I were not needed here—" Sabat cocked his head to one side, red hair spilling over his shoulder, down to the thick leather belt around his tunic. "You would dedicate yourself to study?" Benzir knew he was staring, but for a moment he was spiraling into a tunnel of mystery and the unknown, falling into a world beyond the mists of his own limitations. He jolted, blinked. Yes, I would. I must return to Resurrection. But when you are free of your next spirit, you must visit. When next we meet, I will ask you a question." Benzir tried to read Sabat's intention, but the head of the Order of Dominie was too skilled, and he bowed reverently. "Whatever it is, I will answer." Sabat nodded. "I am partial to Scandic wine." Benzir smiled as he watched the master leave. He meant what he had said. He would dedicate his life to metaphysics, to thanatology. But as to Sabat's promise of a question, he wondered if he could answer, whether he would confess his true nature, that he was a coward, that he didn't deserve immortality. He had asked Sabat a question, whether there was peace at the end of the elven worlds. What he had really meant was whether there was peace for himself in this life. Ia Uare, Belleran, First World. Full-kite Captain Linon slashed downward, cut into his opponent, then danced sideways, watched him crash to the forest floor. Another Calrasian was upon him in seconds. He feinted left, lunged forwards, and skewered his enemy, dodged the fountain of blood that spewed from his mouth. "Tensari?" he yelled over the shouting, the clang of steel on steel. the screams of agony and desperation, heard her answering warning. 3 left! Linon dodged a blow, rolled over the ground, and pounced back to his feet. Holding his blade across his face, he countered a strike and sidestepped. Using his opponent's inertia, Linon kicked out and pushed him headfirst to the ground, stabbing downwards through his back. He turned, sharp eyes watching as his patrol finished the last of the enemy, a large group of Calrasians they had stumbled across on their way home. To one side, Folkite Lieutenant Tensari stood breathless but otherwise perfectly healthy. Linon smiled, watched her return it. He glanced at the sun. "We are close to Nanu. Fancy a trip to the giant trees? A glimpse of Green Sun and his family in the boughs?" Tensari's face brightened. "A short flyby can be justified, to make sure the village is safe." Linon turned to the rest of his patrol. "You go on. Wait for me in Silverdale." Approving nods, and the Shirán warriors clapped each other on the shoulders. A quick visit to the blue-eyed raven would be well received after a day of flight and battle. They would cross the source from Belleran to Naz'arán, return to Orgenta together, failed to mention that the captain and lieutenant had stayed in Belleran a little longer than perhaps they should have. They knew why, wholeheartedly approved. Both Linon and Tensari had been Barator to Green Sun, and both had died protecting him. Tensari's teeth flashed white in the failing light, and together with Linon she ran, jumped from a bluff, and soared high into the sky. From the streaks of incandescent blue light, a goshawk and an osprey emerged, flew in perfect formation. In the distance, the towering giant trees of Nanu loomed strong and magnificent upon the Calro River. This was home to one destined for the Order of Shirán. Not that anyone knew that yet, not even Green Sun himself. He should have known, but fate had woven a strange thread in their friend's life, and that decision had been taken from him in the wake of the greatest battle Belleran had ever seen. He'd find out one day, Linon knew. Warm currents sent them soaring higher, and the familiar boughs of Nanu puffed skywards. Linon breathed deeply, but it didn't smell of foliage and spring roots. It smelled of fire. Linon's stomach lurched, and he banked as he dived, through clean air, then smoke. 2 scintillating trails of blue light went unnoticed by the villagers. They were too busy mourning the dead, and as the 2 Shirán warriors cross-fleshed and landed, they walked to the group of silent elves who stood looking at something on the ground. Around them, the dead and twisted bodies of Calrasians who had somehow managed to get this far south. There was no outpost here, because there had never been any need for it, until today. As Linon's eyes raked over the dead, the unmistakable mark of a Ka master was clear. "No," a dread-filled whisper from beside him, one his soul mirrored, and the guiding light in Linon's eyes flared, a surge of power racking his frame. Nearer now, the people turned, stepped aside, tears flowing from disbelieving eyes. Linon's gaze lingered on them, and then he turned to the 2 bodies lying together on the ground. Linon crashed to his knees and wept, for there, laid out gently beneath the trees he had loved so well, lay Feldar, Green Sun. Beside him, the smaller figure of a boy, not 10 summers old, a blanket partially obscuring the side of his body. "Dear gods, Tensari, are they—" It was nothing but a hiss, and she turned, strode away, anger pulsing in the air around her, and far be it from Linon to judge her for it. As Shirán warriors, they served the gods, but no one said they were perfect. Sundering Mists, southern border of estuary, Naz'arán. Master Dominie Benzir stood before the boundary between estuary and the rest of the Divine Isle. Beside him, his apprentice of 10 years, Mentor Dominie Onera. Benzir had gathered Daria's spirit in revival, had reunited her with her child. From there he had guided them both into life. They had met Onera in academy, and as the days, weeks, and months passed, Onara had come to love the mother and her child, who had been slaughtered on the outskirts of Senolé, a village in the war-ravaged lands of Belleran. Beyond the concealing mists, a new world awaited Daria and her daughter. They were finally ready to face their new lives, in a world with new customs and perhaps old friends and family. It wasn't always the case, but today Benzir found himself struggling to contain his emotions, something Onara could not be bothered to even try. It was a trait her master had tried and so far failed to correct in her. Spirits needed strength, to be reassured, to feel safe in the hands of their Dominie. The spirits had enough emotion to deal with, didn't need to feel pity for others. Benzir knew Onara would learn, just as he had, through endless nights listening to dark stories of grief, anger, hatred, and love. Onara would cry 1,000 seas, and only then might she learn to control her heightened empathy. Benzir's mind wandered to centuries past, to a silent glade in the northern regions of confinement, and a familiar weight collected in his gut. He righted his crooked frame, mentally slapped himself for succumbing to his dark thoughts, here, under the bright light of day, standing beside his apprentice. She hadn't noticed, was awash in tears as they watched Daria crest the distant hill, the shorter figure of her daughter led by her mother's hand. There, upon the ridge, Daria turned. The Dominies were too far away to see her expression, but Benzir knew she was smiling back at them. She raised a hand, held it aloft, and then covered her heart, and the smaller figure mirrored her mother's gesture. Benzir turned away, uttered a prayer to Gallo, a plea for their second life to be a good one. Shoving his hands into the sleeves of his cassock, he held on to Daria's smiling face, her fond goodbye. He told himself they would meet again. He clenched his jaw, quelled the spike of anger that threatened to taint his joy and satisfaction. There was one he would never see again. A deep breath, and Benzir held his hand out, fingertips trailing over the soft petals of the wildflowers that jutted from long grass. Somewhere behind him, Onara followed in welcomed silence. Sebat's recent visit had reawakened his passion for philosophy, and specifically the workings of a resurrected spirit's mind. He just wished he had been braver, that he had invited the demi-god to a taste of his wine so that he could ask his questions about mortality and continuity. But he hadn't. He wasn't. Benzir had pushed him away, as he always did with people who saw too much, just as he did with Onara. It was time to return to Priory and the safety of his own quarters. It was time to guide another soul to life, but this time he wouldn't be going to revival alone. The thought was not a bad one. Harbor, Belleran. He was moving, walking perhaps, or at least dreaming that he was, and yet he could feel the cool, crisp grass beneath his bare feet, even though he had made no mark upon the land, no ripple in the air before his mouth. This place was not home, not his world, and yet he would claim it was so with childish pride, for it was a special sort of beauty, the kind that seeps into flesh and muscle, settles in the soul and calms it. It was the colors and contrasts, the verdant prairies and the primal forests, each hue so intense, evoking heightened sensations, bone-deep emotions, a hearty taste or tuneful melody, perceptions from a past he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember anything. The hint of a song sang to the sunlit sky, a soothing lullaby of nostalgic notes that conjured beautiful memories. He couldn't remember them, but he could feel their presence, touch the armor that protected them. From what, he couldn't say. Whatever they were, he knew they marked the best days he had ever seen. The sun was brighter now, almost too much to bear, and he shaded his face from the golden glare. He couldn't feel its heat on his face, but he could feel its comforting caress in his waking soul. Patterns formed overhead.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?